Hello, my name is Valentina Andreeva, and I am a research professor in nutritional epidemiology at the Sorbonne University in Paris, France.
And I'm Marie-Pierre St-Onge. I'm Associate Professor of Nutritional Medicine and Director of the Center of Excellence for Sleep and Circadian Research at Columbia University Irving Medical Center. Together, we're here to present on behalf of our co-authors on a recent paper that we published in the Journal of the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics on the association between ultra-processed food consumption and insomnia in the Nutrinet Santé cohort. So this study was inspired by work in my lab that's interested in uncovering the causality of the bidirectional association between diet and sleep. We showed that adherence to a Mediterranean-style diet is associated with better sleep, where women who have a higher score on Mediterranean dietary adherence have better sleep quality, better sleep efficiency, fewer sleep disturbances. And when we evaluated various food groups within the Mediterranean diet, we found that specifically having higher fruits and vegetables, higher legume intakes, and higher intakes of whole grain breads was associated with better sleep quality, fewer sleep disturbances, and better sleep efficiency. In a separate study where we evaluated diets from a controlled diet and a self-selected diet from our participants, these diets differed on protein, fat, and fiber and sodium content. We found that the controlled diet that provided less fat, less saturated fat, more fiber led to better sleep, better deep sleep with more slow wave sleep, and participants took less time to fall asleep, so they had shorter sleep onset latency than when they self-selected their diet. When we evaluated components of the ad libitum diet that were associated with their sleep at night, we found that various nutrients were associated with sleep quality. First, individuals who consumed more fiber had more restorative, slow wave, or deep sleep, and less light stage 1 sleep. Individuals who consumed more sugar and refined carbohydrates had more arousals, so they had more awakenings in the middle of the night. And individuals who had more saturated fat spent less time in slow wave or deep sleep. So this led us to evaluate various dietary patterns that were associated with sleep quality.
Yes, so pursuing this work, we decided to look at dietary patterns characterized by high intake of what is called ultra-processed food. And for that, we actually relied on the NOVA classification developed by a Brazilian research team led by Professor Carlos Monteiro, who actually assigned each food and beverage to one of 4 groups. The first one is unprocessed food, where we find fruits and vegetables. Second one is culinary ingredients, which are not consumed on their own, but which are used in cooking. And third group is processed food, where we combine group 1 and group 2, usually for homemade preparations. And what we were looking at this time was ultra-processed food, which is group 4, which contains fruit and beverages that are industrially prepared and have gone extensive physical and chemical transformation and processing that include a lot of added substances such as colors, preservatives, stabilizers, and others. This kind of food is typically very high in sugar and salt and or fat. It's usually easily accessible, affordable for consumers. It's ready for consumption, usually attractively packaged, and it's very profitable for manufacturers. So first, we looked at what is available in the literature linking ultra-processed food consumption and sleep parameters. we performed a systematic literature review on that topic, defining ultra-processed food as NOVA Group 4, and without any restriction in terms of the sleep parameter that was being investigated, or type of study, or language, or year of publication. We found 15 cross-sectional studies that corresponded to our criteria, published relatively recently. So starting from 2016 up to 2023, when we performed our work. And those 15, among those 15 studies, about half were carried out in Brazil, and the rest were performed in populations in Spain, Italy, the United Kingdom, Paraguay, Iran, and China. We also did not restrict our literature review in terms of the direction of the association. We looked at both directions, sleep as an exposure and sleep as an outcome. Ultra-processed food was found to be the exposure in 13 among those 15 studies. So this is certainly something that has been much more investigated than the other way around. So among what we found in those 13, again, cross-sectional studies, a little less than half found an inverse association between ultra-processed food consumption, modeled as the exposure, and sleep, various sleep parameters modeled as the outcome. And then the other, about half of the other studies either did not find a statistically significant association, or found some kind of evidence for protection. And then 2 of the 15 studies actually looked at ultra-processed food consumption as the outcome and sleep as the exposure. Both of those studies found an inverse association between ultra-processed food consumption and sleep. So we could say that most of the evidence supported the hypothesis that ultra-processed food consumption had a deleterious impact on sleep. So what we also, looking at the available literature, we realized that most of the studies, which again were cross-sectional, so we could not really infer any causality, but also most of them had poor or average methodological quality. Very few, about a quarter of the studies, used 24-hour dietary records or dietary recalls, which are known to be more appropriate for assessing ultra-processed food intake versus food frequency questionnaires. And despite the variety of sleep parameters that had been studied, there was no study that actually focused on insomnia. So based on the work and results provided by Dr. St-Onge's prior work and this systematic review, we decided to try to fill some of the knowledge gaps by performing a new epidemiological study in the Nutrinet Santé general population cohort, which is conducted online. It was launched in France in 2009. We had data to perform a cross-sectional study from slightly less than 40,000 adults, of whom about 77% were women, with a mean age of about 50 years. In that cohort, sleep was assessed in 2014. It was in 2014, we administered a very comprehensive sleep health questionnaire, which included questions that allowed us to assess the presence or absence of chronic insomnia, which we defined according to the DSM-5 and the ICSD-3 criteria. ICSD is the International Classification of Sleep Disorders. And we found that the prevalence of chronic insomnia in the sample was slightly less than 20%. And then we used 2 or more 24-hour dietary records collected around the sleep assessment, so between 2013 and 2015. We applied the NOVA-4 classification in order to identify foods that would correspond to the ultra-processed category, and found that the proportion of ultra-processed food in the diet of the participants was about 16%. So then we applied logistic regression analysis to explore the associations between ultra-processed food consumption and chronic insomnia in the cohort. We performed the partially and fully adjusted analysis. In the fully adjusted model, our hypotheses were confirmed such that ultra-processed food consumption was significantly associated with an increased risk for chronic insomnia. We did find some evidence for interaction or effect modification by sex, such that in men, the association or the effect size was somewhat stronger, 1.09. Versus the effect size in women, which was 1.05. And basically, this suggests that increasing ultra-processed food intake leads to an increased risk of insomnia, 5% increased risk in women, and 9% increased risk in men. So this is what we just were able to publish.
So it's important to take some factors into consideration when we're examining our findings. First, we were surprised that the association between insomnia risk from ultra-processed food consumption was higher in men compared to women. And that's something that warrants further exploration, evaluating various dietary patterns and how they may influence sleep quality in different subgroups. Importantly, our analyses were cross-sectional, and we were not able to evaluate longitudinal associations. Furthermore, due to these cross-sectional analyses, we could not establish causality, and it's possible that there is some reverse causation. Future studies should be done to evaluate such longitudinal associations and also test causality of associations between diet and sleep. It would be important to conduct clinical intervention studies to compare diets with different ultra-processed food content to determine whether these foods in particular have an impact on sleep quality. Nonetheless, individuals who have sleep difficulties may consider examining their diets to determine whether their food intakes could be contributing to their sleep issues. And finally, we'd like to close with acknowledging the funding for the Nutrinet Santé study that's supported by the French Ministry of Solidarity and Health, National Agency for Public Health, National Institute for Health and Medical Research in France, National Research Institute for Agriculture, Food and Environment, National Conservatory of Arts and Crafts, and Sorbonne Paris Nord University. Pauline Duquesne, who is the first author on this paper, supported by the French National Research Agency. Giada Benassi, who from Columbia University, is supported by a T32 institutional training grant from the National Institute of Diabetes Disorders and Kidney. And I am supported by NIH, NHLBI grants, and NIDDK grants. With that, we'd like to thank you very much. And thank you, Valentina, for this great overview.